Fellas, I'm going to be going through some of the most impressive fighters right now in the UFC. And I'm not just going to be talking about the mainstream fighters, the champions that tend to be consistently doing well. I'm going to be talking about the fighters that have kind of gone under the radar and are doing really well in the UFC, but don't really seem to be getting the recognition for it. Don't really seem to be getting the hype, despite being so impressive recently. They might be on a big winning streak. They might have looked really good recently, but we're going to be going over the most impressive fighters in the UFC right now that should get more recognition for the fights that they've been having and the performances they've been having. And the first fighter I've got on this list is Dan Hooker. Now, Dan Hooker's looked really good in his recent fights. I mean, he's on a 3-fight winning streak in the lightweight division, and he's managed to get to the top 5 of one of the most competitive divisions in the UFC. But he wasn't always like that. There was once a stage in Dan Hooker's career where he'd lost 4 out of his last 5. And, I mean, he had that brutal fight with Dustin Poirier in which he delivered a battering but also got battered, just to get knocked out by Michael Chandler when Chandler made his debut. Then he got a win over Nasrat Haqparast just to immediately get submitted by Islam Makhachev in his next fight in the first round, and then got steamrolled by Arnold Allen at 145. So he'd lost 4 out of his last 5 at the time, 3 of them coming by way of finish and 1 of them being a brutal fight in it. There was just a lot of questions of what is next for Dan Hooker. People thought his chin was completely gone and he'd never been able to recover. People just thought he was a washed and he was never that good to begin with. And that was until he got matched up against Claudio Puelles. Now, coming into that Claudio Puelles fight, Claudio Puelles was on a winning streak. He seemed like a good jiu-jitsu prospect in the UFC. He had a signature knee bar in the UFC, and he just seemed to be a good grappling prospect. And Dan Hooker kind of embarrassed him in that fight, just kept attacking the body, kept dropping him with body shots. And even though Claudio Puelles looked extremely one-dimensional in that fight, it got Dan Hooker back in the winning column. And then immediately after that, he gets matched up against Jalen Turner at UFC 290. Now, he was actually an underdog going into this fight against Jalen Turner, and I don't blame him, because Jalen Turner at the time, he was coming off a really close loss to Gamrot, and before that, he was on an absolute tear, just finishing lightweights after lightweights, and he was one of the most dangerous lightweight strikers in the UFC at the time, was Jalen Turner. And Dan Hooker just goes to war, puts it all out there, and manages to beat Jalen Turner at UFC 290 again, back in the winning column. And then he returns a year later, facing Gamrot. Now, Gamrot going to this fight was the favourite for good reason. Gamrot had literally won 7 out of his last 8 fights, with his only loss being to Benil Dariush, and he looked like an absolute monster. Well, not a monster, but he looked really good, did Gamrot. And again, Dan Hooker just goes to war, puts it all out there, just makes it an absolute scrap and gets back in the winning column again. And he's gone from being a guy who people don't think are ever going to be a serious contender to now being on a 3-fight winning streak with some good names on that winning streak, and being in the top 5 of the lightweight division. And guys like Moicano don't really seem to be giving him the credit, saying it's crazy how he's in the top 15, but you've got to give him credit. He beat Gamrot when, quite frankly, he shouldn't have been able to beat Gamrot, and he's now made it to the top 5. And he kind of went from being this washed lightweight that people didn't really think was ever going to make it that far in the UFC to now being a legit top contender in the lightweight division. You might not think he's ever going to beat the guys like Gaethje, Makhachev, or Oliveira, but at the end of the day, he's managed to become a top contender again. So for the first fighter on this list that has impressed me, is Dan Hooker. He's gone from being washed to being a legit top contender. And another fighter I've got on this list is Alexander Volkov. Alexander Volkov, he's always been good in the heavyweight division, and he's always been around, but I feel like he's kind of at the back of the queue when it comes to hype in the heavyweight division. There's so many other guys that get more hype. It's because he's not the most powerful dude in the heavyweight division. He's not this new, young, this young up-and-coming guy in the UFC who's looked really quick. He's not a relentless grappler. He's kind of just good everywhere, but he doesn't really get the recognition. Despite having, looking really good in the heavyweight division, the dude beat Marcin Tybura, the dude finished Alexander Romanov, the dude finished Rozenstruik, the dude finished Taito Ivaza. In his last fight, he absolutely butchered the big scary Russian Sergey Pavlovich, and now he's on a 4-fight winning streak with 3 of them coming by way of finish. And look at his losses. He lost to Tom Aspinall, who's the best heavyweight in the world. He lost a decision loss to Cyril Gane, who is going to be fighting again at UFC 310, so even that could turn into a win as well. He lost a decision to a nightmare matchup in Curtis Blades, and he lost to Derek Lewis in a fight that he was absolutely dominating until he got caught by a big shot. And if you look at the guys he's beaten and he's lost to in the rankings, he's only really lost to the best, with one of them being not a fluke, but a fight that he was winning the entire fight. And then he's had some really good wins. And again, Cyril Gane, there's a rematch booked. He could get that win and become a title contender. And the Derek Lewis fight, he was dominating. And he's always been a guy, like I said, as Cyril Gane, who's been at the top of the heavyweight division, just piecing people up. He's never really been on a big losing streak. He's never really fallen off. He's always been consistent in his UFC career, and he seems to be hit of like a second wind in his career. And like I said, he's going to be matched up against Cyril Gane, and I actually don't mind his odds in that fight, because he didn't look too bad in the first fight, and he seems to have really turned on his career in these past couple of fights. So Alexander Volkov, in my opinion, is a fighter that doesn't really get his recognition in the heavyweight division, despite being definitely top 3 or top 4, one of the best in the division right now, but he just doesn't really seem to get the hype. Then we've got Renato Moicano. Now, it's not that Moicano doesn't necessarily get the recognition. I think he definitely gets the recognition, but he's definitely impressed me, Renato Moicano, because you look back at his career a couple of years ago, he wasn't in the same position he was in now. He was getting absolutely destroyed by guys like Rafael dos Anjos. He got knocked out by Rafael Fiziev in the first round, and he was kind of at this weird stage in his career where no one really thought he was ever going to be a legit contender or even be ranked in the lightweight division. And you look at him now, he's calling out these top 5 fighters, he's making more money than he ever has before, and more importantly, you look at his, his record recently, the dude's on a big streak. He's won 6 out of his last 7, with his only loss being to Rafael dos Anjos, and the majority of those wins are coming by way of finish. You look at his last 4, he submits Brad Riddell, then he goes out there in a fight night and puts on a war with Drew Dober, gets the win. Then he gets matched up against Jalin Turner at UFC 300, nearly gets finished in the first round just to come back and get a big finish in the second. Then he gets matched up in enemy territory against Benoit Saint-Denis, gets the win and butchers Benoit Saint-Denis in that first round, to the point where the doctors had to stop the fight and give Renato Moicano the win. There's only a handful of fighters that I genuinely would pick confidently against Renato Moicano, and those are the top guys of the division, the guys like Makhachev, Sarukian, Oliveira, Gaethje, Poirier, that happen to be the top 5 of the division, when it's only the top 5 of the division that I'm confident would beat you. That's saying a lot about Renato Moicano's career and where he's come from, because I honestly think he's one of the best submission grapplers in the UFC. He's not one of these wet blanket grapplers that just hold people down and do nothing. He's a real big submission threat, and if it's not the submission, he's just going to beat the shit out of you with ground and pound. And I honestly don't mind his odds against Dan Hooker and Paddy Pimblett if he is going to fight those guys next. He's a big star in the lightweight division. He's better than he ever has been before. He's massively improved in these last couple of years, and I think he's really impressed me in his last few fights as Renato Moicano. So I'm going to say he's another fighter that has impressed me. Then we've got Deiveson Figueiredo. Deiveson Figueiredo is another fighter that's kind of moved from the flyweight division, had a really successful bantamweight career, and I still feel like he doesn't really get the recognition. Like I said before, former flyweight champion of the world. He actually has a win over the current flyweight champion Pantoja, which no one really seems to be able to do. And like I said, moved from the flyweight division to the bantamweight division, has his first fight against Rob Font, ends up winning that fight really comfortably. Then he fights Cody Garbrandt at UFC 300, submits him in the second round, and then he gets matched up against Marlon Vera, the same Marlon Vera that had literally just fought for the belt against Sean O'Malley, and he won that fight comfortably as well. And I feel like he's looked really good in the bantamweight division. He's now going to be matched up against Peter Yan in a fight night main event later this year, and if he wins that fight, undoubtedly he's going to be fighting for a belt against either Marab or Umar Magomedov. And we all know that Deiveson Figueiredo is super skilled as well. I mean, the dude, he's got really good striking, he's very powerful on the feet, good boxing, and he's grappling in his jiu-jitsu. He's just high level. He's one of the best grapplers right now in the bantamweight division, and it's not even just that. I think even if he doesn't get to win a belt in the bantamweight division, I think he's always going to be a top 5 fighter in this division, which is impressive considering he's already a champion in a completely different weight class. So I'm going to say that Deiveson Figueiredo is another fighter that has massively impressed me in the UFC in the past couple of years. Next up, we've got Tatsuro Taira. Tatsuro Taira, obviously in the flyweight division, one of the best flyweights in the world, top 5 ranked. The dude's undefeated, and a majority of his wins in the UFC are coming by way of finish, and he's just got such good jiu-jitsu. People talk about Pantoja being this good jiu-jitsu artist. No, Tatsuro Taira has good jiu-jitsu. You need to watch this dude's highlights, and it's not only just his grappling as well, his striking as well has improved massively in these past couple of fights. And in his last fight, he got matched up in a fight night main event against Alex Perez, the same Perez that was coming off a knockout over Nicolau. And even though it ended in an injury, he looked really good in that fight. His transitions, his grappling, his jiu-jitsu overall in that fight looked so high level, and he's a big grappling prospect right now in the flyweight division for good reason. And I can't wait for his fight with Brandon Royval. He's matched up against Brandon Royval in a fight night main event later this year, and I don't mind his odds going into that fight. I think, like I said, he has good odds going into that fight against Brandon Royval, despite Royval being one of the best. And if he does beat Royval, he's probably going to be fighting for a belt. And it's not only that, the dude is 24 years of age, and I know he's in the flyweight division, and flyweights do tend to be younger than any other division, but let's say he retires at 32, he's still got like another 8 years in the UFC, which is, I don't mind his odds of becoming a future champion in the flyweight division. So I'm going to say that Tatsuro Taira has massive potential in the flyweight division, and he's really impressed me so far in his UFC career. The next fighter I'm going to go with is Yoel Alvarez. I think Yoel Alvarez is definitely one of the best unranked lightweights in the UFC. I mean, just look at this dude's record. Never gone to a decision when it comes to wins. 17 of his wins come by way of submission, and 4 of them come by way of TKO, and he got a TKO in his last fight as well. This dude is a submission wizard. He's able to pick up, just submissions from anywhere, any opportunity, any mistake his opponent to make, he will capitalize by getting a submission. And you look at his UFC record, he has been on a streak, a lot of them come by way of finish, and his last loss was to Arman Tsarukyan, one of the best lightweights in the world, and he's going to be fighting for a belt in his next fight. And apart from that, the dude has just been slaughtering people with submissions, and if not submissions, he's been finishing them with TKO. And he's managed to get finishes over Elvis Brenner and Thiago Moises in the past couple of fights, which has been really impressive as well. And I just think he's definitely one of the best in the world. Like I said, this dude's grappling is so high level, and he's improved his striking as well, as we saw in his last fight when he was able to finish Elvis Brenner, who's a powerful striker. And I think the dude's got a lot of potential in the flyweight division in the lightweight division to become a ranked fighter. And like I said before, I think he might actually be the best unranked lightweight fighter in the UFC. Better than Mitabek Orobai, better than Fares Ziam, better than Ludovic Klein, better than Diego Ferreira. I think he's the best right now. I think he's got potential to be ranked. I think he's an absolute killer, and I think that's why he should fight Benoit Saint-Denis next. I think he's earned his shot at a ranked fighter. If we're going to give him any ranked fighter, why not give him Benoit Saint-Denis, who's on a 2-fight losing streak by way of finish, against a guy that can't do anything but stop finishing people. So I'm going to say that Yoel Alvarez is another one of these fighters that have been really impressive. But that is my list of some of the most impressive fighters in the UFC right now. The fighters that have looked amazing, the fighters that have been performing really well, and just the fighters that seem to be on their A game. Let me know your thoughts on this list. Thank you for watching.